U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi during the Global Security Conference in Munich. Now, this is the first face-to-face meeting between the two leaders since the U.S. military shot down a suspected Chinese surveillance balloon earlier this month. Taking to Twitter, Blinken said that he warned Wang Yi against violations of its airspace after a Chinese spy balloon flew over North America. Blinken further asserted on how it was unacceptable and irresponsible for China to send a spy balloon into the American airspace. Earlier on Saturday, Wang Yi took a swipe at Washington, accusing it of violating international norms with what Beijing calls unbelievable and almost hysterical behavior. Beijing has also denied using spy balloons and says that the balloon was for weather research.
There are so many balloons all over the world. So is the United States going to shoot all of them down? This practice of the United States is not proof that the United States is powerful, but quite the opposite. We advise the US side stop doing such absurd things in its dealing of foreign affairs out of domestic political necessity.
According to the U.S. State Department, Blinken also discussed other ongoing affairs with Wang Yi, and that includes discouraging China from supporting Russia in its ongoing war with Ukraine and condemning North Korea's firing of a missile into the Sea of Japan. He also underscored the importance of maintaining diplomatic dialogue and open lines of communication with China. During the talks, Blinken warned Wang Yi of consequences if China provides material support to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And echoing similar concerns, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris said that she was troubled that China had deepened its relationship with Russia after Moscow invaded Kyiv.
Of course, we have also seen nations like North Korea and Iran send weapons in support of Russia's brutal war. We are also troubled that Beijing has deepened its relationship with Moscow since the war began. Looking ahead, any steps by China to provide lethal support to Russia would only reward aggression, continue the killing, and further undermine a rules-based order.
Diplomatic tensions between the U.S. and China have risen since the shooting down of the alleged Chinese spy balloon, which China has insisted was not intended for spying. For more on this, we're now being joined by Andrew K.P. Leong from Hong Kong. He's a political analyst. Welcome to the broadcast, Mr. Leong. I want to first start by asking you that how do you assess the latest meeting between Blinken and his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi? We know that this is the first in-person meeting between the two diplomats since the balloon incident took place earlier this month.
First of all, let's get the facts straight as far as the balloons are concerned. The Chinese balloon that was shot down was up in so-called near space. In other words, the altitude is normally beyond civilian flights or aviation. In fact, in the so-called near space, there are no international law governing movements of objects in the near space because it's outside the bounds of civil aviation. And in fact, that's what President Biden is instructing his deputies to look into this. In fact, this is a major concern for the world because near space was normally out of bounds, but now with technology, there are various concerns. So that's the fact number one. Fact number two, the other three balloons that were subsequently shot down, President Biden already confirmed that these are commercial, kind of private balloons for commercial and other meteorological purposes. It's unlikely to be got anything to do with China. So that was a bit of embarrassment because at the beginning, it was the story was that China sending balloons left, right, and center. Now, having addressed the issue of the balloons, the relationship between China and the United States is deep-seated and also entering into an era of major confrontations because the United States is seeing China as a near competitor, threatening the so-called global order dominated by the United States. Whereas China is of course growing in influence, and even if you are a panda, if you grow up to be a 10 million pounds panda, you can't hide your influence. So that's the kind of tragedy of great powers, as it were. And both sides need to address this. What the United States want is not really to be nice to China because there is a bipartisan support in confronting China, but they just want to put the guardrails. There is no reason why the United States would provoke a hot war with China in the same way that the United States dare not provoke a hot war directly with Russia, but rather using proxies. But then the relationship is fraught, and hence the Biden-Wang Yi meeting.
Right. Like you mentioned, just to add to that U.S. President Joe Biden clearly said that the 3 other aerial objects that were detected were not linked to the Chinese spying surveillance balloon. But I want to ask you that similar balloons have been detected in the Canadian airspace and that of Japan as well. What are the reasons for such balloons being detected?
Well, I think that China in the beginning already said, because balloons are balloons. And if you look at the map, Montana is thousands of miles away from China, and the balloon is not perfectly navigable, and then it's drifting. As I said, it's in deep in near space. It's subject to the influence of currents. So obviously, that China at the beginning already said there was an unintended kind of incident, but of course the United States would regard that as a violation of its airspace and threatening its national security. But then the reality remains that near space, such a high altitude, is not really subject to any international law. So I think that the world is now waking up to this, and I think it's a right subject to be addressed internationally.
Right. According to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Wang Yi did not apologize during the meeting. Do you think that Beijing is even keen on mending relations with Washington? Because we know when the suspected Chinese spy balloon was shot down, Beijing clearly said that the shooting down has reached one of the lowest point between United States and China's relationship.
Well, of course, Wang Yi did not apologize because, as I said, that this is an unintended kind of thing. But neither did the United States apologize for shooting down the balloon in an area so altitude so high, and in fact shooting down the other 3 smaller balloons. But the fact remains that both sides are at loggerheads. As I said, it's an existential threat perceived by the United States across the aisle. And I think that what Wang Yi said was quite instructive. And Wang Yi was suggesting that Americans should change tack in dealing with China because the kind of method, the kind of strategy towards China is all confrontation on all sides. In other words, 360 degrees pushback, left, right, and center, technology, ideology, military, diplomatic, Taiwan, and then stepping China at the back and blackening China all over. While that's on one side, and on the other side, and say, well, let's make friends. But what China is saying, well, this is not possible. It's the holistic kind of relationship. And if you're trying to kill me with a knife on the one hand and asking me, holding the other hand to shake hands, well, that's not possible. So I think that that's what Wang Yi said. But then it's easier said than done, bearing in mind bipartisan politics and the coming up presidential election in the United States.
Right. Now, apart from the balloon row, there were other issues that were also raised at the Munich Security Conference. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris raised concerns regarding China's deepened relationship with Russia. I want to seek your inputs regarding what is China really trying to gain and what is Beijing's strategy when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia war.
Well, China and Russia are already forming a much closer relationship because the two economies almost ideally complementary. Even before the Ukraine war, Russia is a net energy exporter, and China is the world's largest energy customer. And not only on energy, but on food as well. China is short of food agricultural products, and Russia is one of the world's largest exporter. So the two economies are intertwined even before the Ukrainian war, and because they both are made into an enemy of the United States, so inevitably the two countries are pushed together. But China's been very, very careful not to get involved in the Ukraine war by supplying lethal weapons. But of course, that the Washington is sending out these signals to prevent China from doing so.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Leong, and sharing your insights with us. Thanks very much.